Nice warm coat, if you're wondering. When I left off, we had made it to the 20th century. So, Shiloh Seventh-day Baptist in the 20th century. I'll start right back in. Our first decade, term of life for a deacon, or term of service, becomes life or during good behavior. I guess it used to be a 1 or 2 year position. So, in 1903, if you're curious, Sabbath school started at 3 p.m. So, found this interesting. In 1905, there was a motion made to revise the Articles of Faith to include a statement that alcohol, opium, and tobacco leads to insanity, disease, and immorality. Just saying. All right, Reverend James Skaggs was here in 1910 and 1914. They added cement walkways around the churchyard, and his daughter Margaret would return later in the century as Mrs. Charles H. Bond. 1913, to raise the standard of living, it was voted that names of anyone breaking the church covenant would be placed on a suspended list until such time as they should again desire to meet the requirements of the church. Arlo Sutton was our pastor, and during his time, children's Sabbath school classes had graded classwork. Keep that in mind. Also, during 1916 in September, Sabbath school was canceled because of an outbreak of infant paralysis, polio. I mean, that's how recent and how long ago that was a major concern. They also did not have Sabbath school in October 1918 due to the Spanish flu. If you know anything about that time frame, more people died of the flu than died in World War I. But speaking of World War I, there was no Sabbath school in November because they had a peace parade in Bridgeton. So they canceled it for a happy reason, finally. Moving on. Pastor Maltby, as was mentioned before, he started right out of seminary. I found it interesting, in our invitation letter, we told Pastor Maltby that the parsonage was his, furnished with electric lights, water in the kitchen and bath, and that the 3-piece living room set is valued more as an antique rather than for its beauty. Doesn't that sell you on wanting to come? In the 1930s, Pastor Maltby would have a sermonette each week for the children. We began White Christmas all the way back in 1934. 1935, we started using weekly bulletins. And during the 30s, Vacation Bible School had 300 in attendance, which is impressive since Shiloh only had 325 people. Speaking of fire, Tuesday, February 6, 1934, fire erupts in the church and rages for several hours. Shiloh, Bridgeton, Hopewell, Stowe Creek, and Upper Deerfield fire departments respond. Most of the damage occurs in the entrance area and up in the balcony. I did read where they actually had put in a raised floor in certain areas, and they had to rip out the floor because the floor underneath was what was on fire. Several pews were removed during the fire, and I'm not sure quite how they did that, but they removed several pews, and the first fireman on the scene actually removed the piano, saving it from damage. Local farmers brought milk cans, and they would fill those with water from the Perkins de Wilde Nursery. Now, that predates me. Who might know where that was? Is that over here, back here, back here? Right over here. That's my guess. All right, some of the ladies provided sandwiches and coffee for the firemen. I mean, Seventh-day Baptist, I mean, obviously out here, we got to have sandwiches. Took care of the working men there, taking care of the fire. I thought that was interesting. The chorister and an assistant would rummage through the ashes of the church and salvage enough hymnals for church until new ones could be bought. And as Elizabeth was mentioning, what would we do in case of a fire? Marlboro offered. Rhodestown, Cohansey Church offered. We actually took an offer up from the Shiloh School Board and met at the school. So that's what we did back in the 30s. So rising from the ashes, a new pipe organ was purchased. They added an inside stairway to get to the basement. The Benevolent Society provided a well-equipped kitchen and dining room in the basement. That's where the dinners were back then. Ironically, in order to do that, they took out the baptistry from the church because it interfered with the kitchen downstairs. So we may be Baptists, but we like our emphasis dinners. 1937, 200th anniversary. General Conference is held in Shiloh. The last time it's actually held here. The close of the anniversary program was supervised by 37-year-old Florence Bowden. And kind of in thinking with the 200th anniversary, in February, the church voted at a special business meeting, decided to install indoor bathrooms. So, she didn't have to go outdoors anymore. All right, into the 40s. Pastor Osborne arrives. 6 p.m. on Friday, the church bell would sound to remind the shop owners it's time to close. Ministry outreach started to the elderly at the Cumberland Manor, and soon we were the Banana Church. If you know anything about that, we would hand out bananas to the residents there, and we have for many a year since. Willing Workers Sabbath School classes formed, and I found it interesting that there was actually a motion to purchase an offertory basket for the choir at a cost of $1. 1949, the Sabbath School superintendent reports overcrowding, and a committee is formed to look into expanding the session room, which, remember, it was over here. That was the second floor. It was brought down in the Memorial Chapel. They want to build a session room and add a basement to it. Music committee is formed to guide our 3 choirs, the senior, the teenage, and the junior. And if you know anything of history at that time, the Sabbath School sent $50 to help evacuate missionaries from communist China. They drove all the missionaries out of China at the time, and we helped to rescue those that we could. So 1950, the leader of the choir up to that point was an elected position, but they decided to change that in 1950. Sabbath School passed a motion to purchase and hang an electric clock in the sanctuary. I thought that was interesting enough. I had to point that out. And they built a platform extension for the church for $20. It was used, and still was used, I'm sure. The Osborne era came to an end as he accepted a call to Ashaway and announced his departure in January. He was a strongly conservative pastor and attacked from the pulpit such worldly practices as gambling, drinking, dancing, and attending movies. On to Pastor Lippincott. During the Lippincott era, the session room expansion I mentioned was slow due to too few workers showing, so the church actually hires out the services in 1951, and ironically, it still takes till 1954 to dig the basement and put a room on top. 51 young people are served by a camping program that would go to the Shiloh Deer Woods near Tabernacle. Now, how many of you know where Tabernacle is? How many of you think you could get there in about 15, 20 minutes? Fred thinks he can get there in 15 or 20 minutes. I'm not riding with him. Quite a ways away, we had to send our kids for a camping program. So they decide to form a committee with Marlboro for a permanent campsite. Board of Christian Education is formed in 1956. And in 1958, the vote for the pastor is 30 yes, 32 no, and Pastor Lippincott leaves. Moving on to the Charles Bond era. Many things happen here. We have the Pastoral Relations Committee formed. I kind of think that probably goes hand in hand with the previous vote. Advent candle lighting starts. The ASC class forms. Fisherman class forms. We start the church Christmas card tradition. In 1976, the Board of Christian Ed recommends that we move Christian Endeavor. How many of you remember it called CE? We moved Christian Endeavor to Friday nights, and the Friday night youth groups are born. Here's some pictures from youth groups from that time and shortly thereafter. And next up, near and dear to my heart, West District. Now, in 1932, it was proposed that we have some good, clean amusement with games played at Academy Hall, which is a silo school, for young people with at least 50% attendance, but no action is taken. It's not until January of 1959 that the first West District basketball games start, and that's down at Stowe Creek. Found out that my dad was the first boys coach, and Louise Corson was the first girls coach. We even had a softball league in the 60s and 70s that I just barely remember. So, big news, 1969, the boys team wins the league, and the church holds a dinner in their honor. In fact, they must have done so well in 1970, Sabbath School decides maybe they deserve shirts. Here's the pictures of our champs from 1969. Some you may recognize, some you may not. I'll let you decide how many you do know. It looks like Charlie Lupton there was coaching. So, Pastor Bond summed it all up, that some years we win games, other years we build character. Girls team is very good this year, and we're building a lot of character. Jersey Oaks Camp, original budget, $12,000. Remember how much the church cost? Original budget, $12,000. We purchased a little over 12 acres at Maskell Mill Pond. Starting September 26, 1959, it's a standing appointment for all able-bodied men to come to the camp location 7 a.m. each Sunday for 14 straight weeks. But we are blessed. God is good. We have masons, carpenters, roofers, plumbers, well drillers, and electricians, all within the church body. And we have reaped the benefits ever since. The main lodge is completed. They did so well, there was a push made to complete both barracks in time for the 1960 camping season. Camp's dedicated in July. July 3rd, over 400 people attend the first Camp Fellowship Day and are named the camp contest winner, Jane Harris Chernosky. So, $1967, only 8 seasons later, they decided to get hot and cold running water, toilets, sinks, and showers for the barracks. I didn't start camping until about 10 years later, and I'm glad. So, full week of camp only cost $15 for senior camp, 1967. We weren't done yet. Fellowship Hall. During the 1962 225th anniversary celebration, a look ahead included drawings of a future Fellowship Hall. And that was written up in the British Evening News. Why did we need a Fellowship Hall? Well, up to 6 Sabbath school classes would meet in here each week. Can you imagine trying to have a good discussion with a class, and a class going on all at the same time? So, Fellowship Hall was completed at a cost of over $83,000 in 1968. And it has served its purpose. There it is. So, just as a follow-up, 1968, men were busy and they turned the church basement into 4 classrooms in their spare time and on Sundays. The Memorial Chapel was dedicated in 1968, now serving as the Fisherman Classroom and the Bell Choir Practice Room also. 1970, we got the baptistry back. It was reinstalled. It was gone for about 33 years. And the Fellowship Hall mortgage is paid off at the bicentennial. So, moving forward, Pastor Kamiga, Pastor John was here. 1985, we had a joint committee formed with Marlboro. Pastor John actually went out and got his EMT license to help out down to Jersey Oaks. And I don't mean to slight all the many people in our congregation that had their EMT license and nursing license. We've been a very dedicated and service-oriented church for many years. But he was the first pastor to do it. And in 1985, 1986, for the first time ever, the National Seventh-day Baptist Youth Fellowship officers for the denomination came from Shiloh, One of them sitting in the back right there. Suzanne was one of them. And we wrote our 250th anniversary history book, which I had cited earlier. I think the next picture might have that. The definitive history of the Seventh-day Baptist Church of Shiloh, 1737 to 1987. So that brings us to 250 years that we celebrated. We're still going strong.